Good morning, readers. I'm Craig, and this is Marauder's Mike. Here we do slow, trauma informed readings of fiction, pausing to notice what's happening beneath the surface: fear, attachment, defenses, power, and the ways try to survive chaos. This isn't recap or fandom theory. I'm interested in why certain stories stay with us, what they reveal about being human, and how stories help us restore meaning after things fall apart. We read slowly, we think out loud, and we talk about it together. I'll check in with comments as we go, and we'll leave some space at the end for conversation. Some of the material we touch on can be confronting, so take it at whatever pace works for you. This is a blind, improv first read, so I cannot preemptively warn you for triggers. Today we are reading Book 4, Chapter 13, Mad-Eye Moody, from Harry Potter. During this read, for today, I'm interested in not only seeing how Mad-Eye is introduced and what we learn about him, but also seeing how the characters and the system of Hogwarts, the school, how they react to Moody, and of course, what else this chapter reveals about us. So as we go through, look for yourself, see if you can pull out anything, maybe not about Mad-Eye, but how the system reacts to Mad-Eye and what that shows us. Before we start, remember to listen for meaning, not plot, and let's begin. Chapter 13, Mad-Eye Moody. The storm had blown itself out by the following morning, though the ceiling in the great hall was still gloomy. Heavy clouds of pewter gray swirled overhead as Harry, Ron, and Hermione examined their new timetables at breakfast. A few seats along, Fred, George, and Lee Jordan were discussing magical methods of aging themselves and bluffing their way into the Triwizard Tournament. "Today's not bad. Outside all morning," said Ron, who was running his finger down his timetable. "Herbology with the Hufflepuffs and care of magical creatures. Damn it, we're still with the Slytherins." "Double divination this afternoon," Harry groaned, looking down. Divination was his least favorite subject, apart from potions. Professor Trelawney kept predicting Harry's death, which he found extremely annoying. One would, wouldn't it? Wouldn't they? Yes, one would, wouldn't they? "You should have given it up like me, shouldn't you?" said Hermione briskly, buttering herself some toast. "Then you'd be doing something sensible, like arithmancy." "You're eating again, I notice," said Ron, watching Hermione add liberal amounts of jam to her buttered toast. "I've decided there are better ways of making a stand about elf rights," said Hermione haughtily. "Yeah, and you are hungry," said Ron, grinning. There was a sudden rustling noise above them, and 100 owls came soaring through the open windows carrying the morning mail. Instinctively, Harry looked up, but there was no sign of white among the mass of brown and gray. The owls circled the tables, looking for the people to whom their letters and packages were addressed. A large tawny owl soared down to Neville Longbottom and deposited a parcel in his lap. Neville almost always forgot to pack something. On the other side of the hall, Draco Malfoy's eagle owl had landed on his shoulder, carrying what looked like his usual supply of sweets and cakes from home. Trying to ignore this sinking feeling of disappointment in his stomach. All right, actual physical feelings here. Harry returned to his porch. Was it possible that something had happened to Hedwig and that Sirius hadn't even gotten his letter? His preoccupation lasted all the way across the sodden vegetable path until they arrived in Greenhouse 3. But here he was distracted by Professor Sprout, showing the class the ugliest plants Harry had ever seen. Indeed, they looked less like plants than thick, black, giant slugs, protruding vertically out of the soil. Each was squirming slightly and had a number of large, shiny swellings upon it, which appeared to be full of liquid. Bubo tubers, Professor Sprout told them briskly. They need squeezing. You will collect the pus. Disgusting. The what? Said Seamus Finnegan, sounding revolted. Pus, Finnegan, pus, said Professor Sprout, and it's extremely valuable, so don't waste it. You will collect the pus, I say, in these bottles. Wear your dragon hide gloves. It can do funny things to the skin when undiluted. Bubo tuber pus. Squeezing the bubo tubers was disgusting, but oddly satisfying. As each swelling was popped, a large amount of thick, yellowish green liquid burst forth, which smelled strongly of petrol. They caught it in the bottles, as Professor Sprout had indicated, and by the end of the lesson, had collected several pints. This will keep Madame Pomfrey happy, said Professor Sprout, stopping the last bottle with a cork. An excellent remedy for the more stubborn forms of acne, bubotuber pus, should stop students resorting to desperate measures to rid themselves of pimples. Like poor Eloise Midgeon, said Hannah Abbott, a Hufflepuff, in a hushed voice. She tried to curse hers off. Silly girl, said Professor Sprout, shaking her head, but Madame Pomfrey fixed her nose back on in the end. We should assume then that the silly thing fell off. A booming bell echoed from the castle across the wet grounds, signaling the end of the lesson, and the class separated. The Hufflepuffs climbing the stone steps for Transfiguration, and the Gryffindors heading in the other direction, down the sloping lawn towards Hagrid's small wood cabin, which stood on the edge of the Forbidden Forest. We're going to step out of the story for a second to check comments and talk about what we've seen so far. Good morning. Yes. This here is Gollum. He says hi. All right. So far, we haven't seen a whole lot. Harry has reminded us that Trelawney keeps predicting that he'll die. Imagine if a teacher was doing that at school nowadays with a real child. That is horrible. Absolutely horrible. And he's playing it off like, it just gets annoying. Anyways, back to the text. Hagrid was standing outside his hut, one hand on the collar of his enormous black boarhound, Fang. There were several open wooden crates on the ground at his feet, and Fang was whimpering and straining at his collar, apparently keen to investigate the contents more closely. As they drew nearer, an odd rattling noise reached their ears, punctuated by what sounded like minor explosions. Mornin', Hagrid said, grinning at Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Be here, wait for... The way that Hagrid is written is really hard for me to pronounce sometimes. Be here, wait for the Slytherins. They won't want to miss this. Blast end Scroots. Come again, said Ron. Hagrid pointed down into the crates. Urgh, squealed Lavender Brown, jumping backwards. Urgh, just about summed up the blast-ended Scroots, in Harry's opinion. They looked like deformed, shell-less lobsters, horribly pale and slimy looking, with legs sticking out in very odd places and no visible heads. Anyone else notice a theme of grossness coming up so far? There were about 100 of them in each crate, each about 6 inches long, crawling over each other, bumping blindly into the sides of the boxes. They were giving off a very powerful smell of rotting fish. Oh. Count me out. I'm out of this one. Every now and then, sparks would fly out of the end of a Scroot, and, with a small it would be propelled forward several inches. Only just hatched, said Hagrid proudly. So you'll be able to raise them yourselves. Thought we'd make a bit of a project of it. Why would we want to raise them? Said a cold voice. The Slytherins had arrived. The speaker was Draco Malfoy. Crabbe and Goyle were chuckling appreciatively at his words. Hagrid looked stumped at the question. I mean, what do they do? Asked Malfoy. What is the point of them? Hagrid opened his mouth, apparently thinking hard. There was a few seconds' pause, then he said roughly, That's next lesson, Malfoy. You're just feeding him today. Now you'll want to try him on a few different things. I've never had them before. Not sure what they'll go for. I got ant eggs and frog livers and a bit of grass snake. Just try 'em out with a bit of each. First pus, and now this, muttered Seamus. Yeah, Seamus, I'm with you. Nothing but deep affection for Hagrid could have made Harry, Ron, and Hermione pick up squelchy handfuls of frog liver and lower them into the crates to tempt the blast-ended Scroots. Harry couldn't suppress the suspicion that the whole thing was entirely pointless because the Scroots didn't seem to have mouths. Ouch! Yelled Dean Thomas after about 10 minutes. It got me! Hagrid hurried over to him, looking anxious. Its end exploded, said Dean angrily, showing Hagrid a burn on his hand. Yeah, that can happen when they blast off, said Hagrid, nodding. Erg, said Lavender Brown again. Erg, Hagrid. What's that pointy thing on it? Ah, some of them have got stings, said Hagrid enthusiastically. Lavender quickly withdrew her hand from the box. I reckon they're the males. The females gotta sort of sucker things on their bellies. I think they might be to suck blood. Well, I can certainly see why we're trying to keep them alive, said Malfoy sarcastically. Who wouldn't want pets that can burn, sting, and bite all at once? I hate to have to keep saying this, but occasionally Malfoy is very correct. He is not a good person, but sometimes he's right. Just because they're not very pretty, it doesn't mean they're not useful, Hermione snapped. Dragon's blood's amazingly magical, but you wouldn't want a dragon for a pet, would you? Harry and Ron grinned at Hagrid, who gave them a furtive smile from behind his bushy beard. Hagrid would have liked nothing better than a pet dragon, as Harry, Ron, and Hermione knew only too well. He had owned one for a brief period during their first year, a vicious Norwegian ridgeback by the name of Norbert. Hagrid simply loved monstrous creatures. The more lethal, the better. Well, at least the Scroots are small, said Ron as they made their way back up to the castle for a lunch an hour later. And as the kids are making their way to our castle, we'll step out of the story for a second and check our messages and wrap up that scene. It is exactly like if you've known people that like squeezing things out of other people, it is exactly sort of like that. It is gross, and some people, I guess, do find that satisfying. No, I think he's become sort of acculturated to that. Yeah. I mean, it's also not the first time he's been subject to prophecy. So for his age, he's got an unusual amount of prophecy circling around him. And yes, again, everything in the magical world seems to be gross in some sort of fashion. You know, there are, that got my attention while we were reading that segment. He's just continuing the pattern. He doesn't even research the dangers of these creatures. They could be toxic. They could be poisonous. They could, I don't know, steal students' souls or bewitch them or something. He doesn't even know what they eat. This is horribly irresponsible. I mean, I know the dude feels an attunement and affinity for the monstrous creatures, but you at least have a responsibility to know what the heck you're talking about. And yes, thank you. I would agree. Malfoy is correct. Not that the creatures are useless and not that they don't deserve care, but I certainly wouldn't want one. I certainly would not want one for a pet. I wonder if the two gross classes theme is going to lead us anywhere, because thus far we haven't seen anything about Mad Eye. Mm. It's the problem with holding your place in the book with your finger and then talking with your hands. They, and here we go. They are now, said Hermione in an exasperated voice. But once Hagrid's found out what they eat, I expect they'll be 6 feet long. Well, that won't matter if they turn out to cure seasickness or something, will it? Said Ron, grinning slyly at her. You know perfectly well I only said that to shut Malfoy up, said Hermione. As a matter of fact, I think he's right. The best thing to do would be to stamp on the lot of them before they start attacking us all. They sat down at the Gryffindor table and helped themselves to lamb chops and potatoes. Hermione began to eat so fast that Harry and Ron stared at her. Is this the new stand on elf rights? Said Ron. You're going to make yourself puke instead? No, said Hermione, with as much dignity as she could muster, with her mouth bulging with sprouts. I just want to get to the library. What? Said Ron in disbelief. Hermione, it's the first day back. We haven't even got to the homework yet. Hermione shrugged and continued to shovel down her food as though she had not eaten for days. Then she leapt to her feet, said, See you at dinner, and departed at high speed. When the bell rang to signal the start of afternoon lessons, Harry and Ron set off for North Tower, where, at the top of a tightly spiraling staircase, a silver stepladder led to a circular trapdoor in the ceiling and the room where Professor Trelawney lived. Okay, now I think I know why we have two preceding gross scenes. The familiar, sweet perfume emanating from the fire met their nostrils as they emerged at the top of the stepladder. As ever, the curtains were all closed. The circular room was bathed in a dim reddish light cast by the many lamps, which were all draped with scarves and shawls. Harry and Ron walked through the mass of occupied chintz chairs and poufs that cluttered the room and sat down at the same small circular table. Good day, said the misty voice of Professor Trelawney right behind Harry, making him jump. A very thin woman, with enormous glasses that made her eyes appear far too large for her face, Professor Trelawney was peering down at Harry with the tragic expression she always wore whenever she saw him. The usual large amount of beads, chains, and bangles glittered upon her person in the firelight. You are preoccupied, my dear, she said mournfully to Harry. My inner eye sees past your brave face to the troubled soul within, and I regret to say that your worries are not baseless. I see difficult times ahead for you, alas, most difficult. I fear the thing you dread will indeed come to pass, and perhaps sooner than you think. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. Ron rolled his eyes at Harry, who looked stonily back. Professor Trelawney swept past them and seated herself in a large, winged armchair before the fire, facing the glass. Lavender Brown and Pavarti Patil, who deeply admired Professor Trelawney, were sitting on poufs very close to her. My dears, it is time for us to consider the stars, she said. The movements of the planets and the mysterious portents they reveal only to those who understand the steps of the celestial dance. Human destiny may be deciphered by the planetary rays which intermingle. But Harry's thoughts had drifted. The perfumed fire always made him sleepy and dull-witted, and Professor Trelawney's rambling talks on fortune-telling never held him exactly spellbound, though he couldn't help thinking about what she had just said to him. I fear the thing you dread will indeed come to pass. But Hermione was right. Harry thought, irritably, Professor Trelawney really was an old fraud. He wasn't dreading anything at the moment at all. Well, unless you counted his fears that Sirius had been caught. But what did Professor Trelawney know? He had long since come to the conclusion that her brand of fortune telling was really no more than lucky guesswork and a spooky manner. Except, of course, for that time at the end of last term when she had made the prediction about Voldemort rising again. And Dumbledore himself had said that he thought the trance had been genuine when Harry had described it to him. Harry, Ron muttered. What? Harry looked around. The whole class was staring at him. He sat up straight. He had been almost dozing off, lost in the heat and his thoughts. I was saying, my dear, that you were clearly born under the baleful influence of Saturn, said Professor Trelawney, a faint note of resentment in her voice at the fact that he had obviously not been hanging on her words. Born under what? Sorry, said Harry. Saturn, dear. The planet Saturn, said Professor Trelawney, sounding definitely irritated that he wasn't riveted by this news. I was saying that Saturn was surely in a position of power in the heavens at the moment of your birth. Your dark hair, your mean stature, the tragic losses so young in life. I think I am right in saying, my dear, that you were born in midwinter? No, said Harry. I was born in July. Ron hastily turned his laugh into a hacking cough. Half an hour later, each of them had been given a complicated circular chart and was attempting to fill in the position of the planets at the moment of birth. It was dull work, requiring much consultation of timetables and calculation of angles. I've got 2 Neptunes here, said Harry, after a while, frowning down at his piece of parchment. That can't be right, can it? Ah, said Ron, imitating Professor Trelawney's mystical whisper. When 2 Neptunes appear in the sky, it is a sure sign that a midget in glasses is being born, Harry. Seamus and Dean, who were working nearby, sniggered loudly, though not loudly enough to mask the excited squeals from Lavender and Brown. Oh, Professor, look! I think I've got an unaspected planet. Ooh, which one's that, Professor? It is Uranus, my dear, said Professor Trelawney, peering down at the chart. Can I have a look at Uranus too, Lavender? Said Ron. Most unfortunately, Professor Trelawney heard him, and it was this, perhaps, which made her give them so much homework at the end of class. A detailed analysis of the way the planetary movements in the coming month will affect you with reference to your personal chart, she snapped, sounding much more like Professor McGonagall than her usual airy-fairy self. I want it ready to hand in next Monday and no excuses. Miserable old bat, said Ron bitterly as they joined the crowds descending the staircases back to the Great Hall and dinner. That'll take all weekend, that will. And as the students transition out of the class, let's transition over to chat. Right? And I was kind of wondering the same thing. I mean, if you're trying to be convincing and manipulating and spinning stories and, if you're trying to paint a scene, lowering people's inhibitions, yeah. I don't have better words for it than that, but I kind of wondered the same thing. Kind of like a ceremonial space, maybe a sweat lodge or something where you put something on the fire, helps everybody sort of relax. I don't know. There's definitely something interesting in that thought. Oh, okay, Katie. That is interesting. So you're saying that's foreshadowing. Lovely. So I'm not picking up really anything super huge in this chapter so far, other than we had 2 episodes of grossness. We've reminded that Hagrid's not super responsible in teaching creatures, and Trelawney is still Trelawney. Nice pickup on the Voldemort birthday, though. Also, in that scene, it could be that Trelawney, because she started teaching them what, in the second year? This is like the third year they've had Trelawney. At this point, she's probably tired of Harry not freaking out. And this is calling him out like that in class is partially maybe a little bit revenge. So she's trying to get his goat. She knows that what she's been doing hasn't been working and she would like a reaction. So I think maybe part of that is about getting Harry to react. All right, and let's take it back to the text. Lots of homework, said Hermione brightly, catching up with them. Professor Vector didn't give us any at all. Vector for arithmancy? Oh. Well, bully for Professor Vector, said Ron moodily. They reached the entrance hall, which was packed with people queuing for dinner. They had just joined the end of the line when a loud voice rang out behind them. Weasley! Hey, Weasley! Harry, Ron, and Hermione turned. Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle were standing there, each looking fairly pleased about something. Excuse me. What? Said Ron shortly. Your dad's in the paper, Weasley, said Malfoy, brandishing a copy of the Daily Prophet and speaking very loudly so that everyone in the packed entrance hall could hear. Listen to this. Further mistakes at the Ministry of Magic. It seems as though I really can talk sometimes. It seems as though the Ministry of Magic's troubles are not yet at an end, writes Rita Skeeter, special correspondent. Recently under fire for its poor crowd control at the Quidditch World Cup and still unable to account for the disappearance of one of its witches, the ministry was plunged into fresh embarrassment yesterday by the antics of Arnold Weasley of the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. Arnold. When the press spells your name wrong, that is a deliberate dig. Malfoy looked up. Imagine them not even getting his name right, Weasley. It's almost as though he's a complete non-entity, isn't it? He cowed. Everyone in the entrance hall was listening now. Malfoy straightened the paper with a flourish and read on. Arnold Weasley, who is charged with possession of a flying car 2 years ago, was yesterday involved with a tussle with several Muggle law keepers, policemen, over a number of highly aggressive dustbins. Mr. Weasley appears to have rushed to the aid of Mad-Eye Moody, the aged ex-Auror who retired from the ministry when no longer able to tell the difference between a handshake and attempted murder. Unsurprisingly, Mr. Weasley found, upon arrival at Mr. Moody's heavily guarded house, that Mr. Moody had once again raised a false alarm. Mr. Weasley was forced to modify several memories before he could escape from the policeman, but refused to answer Daily Prophet questions about why he had involved the ministry in such an undignified and potentially embarrassing scene. And there's a picture, Weasley, said Malfoy, flipping the paper over and holding it up. A picture of your parents outside their house, if you can call it a house. Your mother could do with losing a bit of weight, couldn't she? Ron was shaking with fury. Everyone was staring at him. Get stuffed, Malfoy, said Harry. Come on, Ron. Oh, yeah. You were staying with them this summer, weren't you, Potter? Sneered Malfoy. So tell me, Is his mother really that porky? Or is it just the picture? You know your mother, Malfoy? Said Harry. Both he and Hermione had grabbed the back of Ron's robes to stop him launching himself at Malfoy. That expression she's got, like she's got dung under her nose? Has she always looked like that, or is it just because you were with her? Malfoy's pale face went slightly pink. Don't you dare insult my mother, Potter. Keep your fat mouth shut, then, said Harry, turning away. Bang. Several people screamed. Harry felt something white-hot graze the side of his face. He plunged his hand into his robes for his wand, but before he'd even touched it, he heard a second loud bang and a roar which echoed through the entrance hall. Oh, no, you don't, laddie. Harry spun around. Professor Moody was limping down the marble staircase. His wand was out, and it was pointing right at a pure white ferret, which was shivering on the stone-flagged floor, exactly where Malfoy had been standing. All right. There was a terrified silence in the entrance hall. Nobody but Moody was moving a muscle. Moody turned to look at Harry. At least, his normal eye was looking at Harry. The other one was pointing into the back of his head. Did he get you? Moody growled. His voice was low and gravelly. No, said Harry. Missed. Leave it, Moody shouted. Leave what? Harry said, bewildered. Moody's not talking to him. Moody is very aware of the scene right now. Moody's still scene management. He knows what's happening. Not you. Him, Moody growled, jerking his thumb over his shoulder at Crabbe, who had just frozen, about to pick up the white ferret. It seemed that Moody's rolling eye was magical and could see out of the back of his head. Moody started to limp towards Crabbe, Goyle, and the ferret, which gave a terrified squeak and took off, streaking towards the dungeons. I don't think so, roared Moody, pointing his wand at the ferret again, and it flew 10 feet into the air, fell with a smack to the floor, and then bounced upwards once more. I don't like people who attack when their opponent's backs turned, growled Moody, as the ferret bounced higher and higher, squealing in pain. Stinking, cowardly, scummy thing to do. The ferret flew through its airs, its legs and tail flailing helplessly. Never do that again, said Moody, speaking each word as the ferret hit the stone floor and bounced upwards again. Professor Moody, said a shocked voice. Professor McGonagall was coming down the marble staircase with her arms full of books. Hello, Professor McGonagall, said Moody calmly, bouncing the ferret still higher. What? What are you doing? Said Professor McGonagall, her eyes following the bouncing ferret's progress through the air. Teaching, said Moody. Teach? Moody, is that a student? Shrieked Professor McGonagall, the books spilling out of her arms. Yep, said Moody. No, cried Professor McGonagall, running down the stairs and pulling out her wand. A moment later, with a loud popping noise, Draco Malfoy had reappeared, lying in a heap on the floor with his sleek blonde hair all over his now brilliantly pink face. He got to his feet, wincing. Moody, we never use transfiguration as a punishment, said Professor McGonagall weakly. Surely Professor Dumbledore told you that. We'll talk about McGonagall's weakness here in a minute. He might have mentioned it, yeah, said Moody, scratching his chin unconcernedly. But I thought a good sharp shock. We give detentions, Moody, or speak to the offender's head of house. I'll do that then, said Moody, staring at Malfoy with great dislike. Malfoy, whose pale eyes were still watering with pain and humiliation, looked malevolently up at Moody and muttered something in which the words, my father, were distinguishable. And that links with the McGonagall thing. Oh, yeah? Said Moody quietly. Limping forward a few steps, the dull clunk of his wooden leg echoing around the hall. Wooden leg. Remember that. Well, I know your father of old, boy. You tell him Moody's keeping a close eye on his son. And you'll tell him that from me, now, your head of house will be Snape, will it? Yes, said Malfoy resentfully. Another old friend, growled Moody. I've been looking forward to a chat with old Snape. Come on, you. And he seized Malfoy's upper arm and marched him. He seized Malfoy's upper arm and marched him off towards the dungeons. Professor McGonagall stared anxiously after them for a few moments, then waved her wand at her fallen books, causing them to soar up into the air and back into her arms. Don't talk to me, Ron said quietly to Harry and Hermione as they sat down at the Gryffindor table a few minutes later, surrounded by the excited talk on all sides about what had just happened. And let's zoom out and let's talk about what just happened. We'll start with the messages. Okay. So Hermione quit the same year that she was introduced? It all came, okay, that was all in POA. Okay, that makes sense to me. I mean, I thought it felt like longer. We're going to get to that. It is very 90s to insult each other's mothers, but honestly, also think about it. They've already done dads. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a perfect natural segue. Thank you for that, Katie. Yeah, let's talk about what we just saw here in this scene with Moody and Draco and Harry and the crew. Now, Draco's just being Draco and doing Draco things. Normally, he hasn't popped off and tried to attack people from behind. But in this case, that was very useful behavior because that gave Moody an incident to respond to. So, just like the cowboy entrance analogy from the last chapter, we're doing regular Hogwarts stuff, and then boom, Moody's on the scene. Now, if we think about the incident from previous years where we had a hippogriff and Hagrid got in a lot of trouble for some incidental contact with an animal in a class, imagine how much trouble Moody has just created for the school by essentially physically slamming a student into the walls over and over and over again for an infraction that the kid had not even committed yet in flagrance of school policy. He has just made Hogwarts and Dumbledore by extension exceptionally vulnerable. And we're not going to pathologize anybody here, but what we've learned about Moody so far, how he's painted out in the press, what his reputation is he sounds like somebody who's lived entirely for far too long on the edge. Sounds like he's got a lot of hypervigilance. And when it comes to threat scenarios, he probably gets to very rapid assessments very quickly, which is helpful when you live on the edge for a long time. But unfortunately, he's probably too prone to trust his assessments. He probably collapses that ambiguity far too fast and decides on a course of action. And those instincts come from somewhere. If you've ever sat through an ambush or a surprise attack, you don't have time to dither. Time is money, is life, and you must move. So those instincts are valid, but now they're overtuned, and he instantly collapses a situation into an action to resolve it without any time to investigate or verify his hypotheses. He knows what he knows, and he's ready to act. Now, obviously, I don't know the canon yet about his eye and the powers that he's bringing to the fight. But so far, This would be something similar to PTSD or a war veteran um, who is still very, very much has those patterns alive in them. Well, let me get a sip of coffee and we'll get back to it. And that's why I was talking about the McGonagall thing, because not only does McGonagall have concern for the students, even Draco Malfoy, but she's concerned about what this is going to do to Hogwarts and Dumbledore. Oh, and I just saw when I said, pay attention to the wooden peg leg. Imagine you're on the ground. You've just been humiliated. And the person who just humiliated you is speaking sternly to you. And they come towards you. And you don't hear footsteps. You just hear a remorseless clunk. Step. Clunk. Step. Clunk. So envisioning Moody pacing towards Malfoy while he's yelling at him with a peg leg, I mean, that's a scene. And speaking of scenes, we'll take it back to the book. They were sitting down at the Gryffindor table a few minutes later. Why not? Said Hermione in surprise. Because I want to fix that in my memory forever, said Ron, his eyes closed and an uplifted expression on his face. Draco Malfoy, the amazing bouncing ferret. Harry and Hermione both laughed, and Hermione began doling beef casserole into each of their plates. He could have really hurt Malfoy, she said. It was good, really, that Professor McGonagall stopped it. Hermione, said Ron furiously, his eyes snapping open again. You're ruining the best moment of my life. Hermione made an impatient noise and began to eat at top speed again. Don't tell me you're going back to the library this evening, said Harry, watching her. Got to, said Hermione thickly. Loads to do. But you told us, Professor Vector. It's not schoolwork, she said. Within 5 minutes, she had cleared her plate and departed. With the departure of Hermione, let's cover that little scene snippet real fast. We know Hermione has plenty of reasons to dislike Malfoy. But in this little scene segment here, Hermione still manages to express that morally what was happening was wrong. So Hermione says, I don't like this kid, but that was wrong. So if we leverage that with her standing up to Trelawney and her growing positionality on the elves, it seems like Hermione is becoming the moral compass of the group. Perhaps. No sooner had she gone than her seat was taken by Fred Weasley. Moody, he said. How cool is he? Beyond cool, said George, sitting down opposite Fred. Super cool, said the friend's best friend, Lee Jordan, sliding into the seat beside George. We had him this afternoon, he told Harry and Ron. What was it like? Said Harry eagerly. Fred, George, and Lee exchanged looks full of meaning. Never had a lesson like it, said Fred. He knows, man, said Lee. Knows what? Said Ron, leaning forward. Knows what it's like to be out there doing it, said George impressively. Doing what? Said Harry. Fighting the dark arts, said Fred. He's seen it all, said George. Amazing, said Lee. Ron dived into his bag for his timetable. We haven't got him till Thursday, he said, in a disappointed voice. And that closes chapter 13, Mad Eye Movie. Moody. Sorry. All right, so let's take it to the comments, and then we will do the chapter closeout. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in that scene, we saw Malfoy go from being an oppressor to being oppressed without any real due process or education or appeal or evidentiary procedure. One person got mad because they didn't like what he was doing and had the power to do something about it, and they did. So, yeah, I feel bad for Malfoy in the second half of that particular scene as well. Is he allowed to behave that way? Also, no. That did need to be addressed, but maybe not like that. All right, well, if we look back through the chapter, what we had was 2 gross classes, one of which was divination. So we get reminded that Trelawney is out there and she's trying to provoke reactions with Harry. And then we had some gross herbology stuff. I know that actually came first, but lots of themes of grossness. Oh my goodness. I'm glad you guys can't hear that because that was really loud. And that set us up. Well, we were nicely set up for that conflict with Draco, and we found Mad Eye, and Mad Eye is definitely got a bit of a hair trigger. And he's now jeopardized the position of Dumbledore and the school, which is probably not helpful with this incoming Triwizard tournament. Well, all right, everybody. Thanks for joining me. And Chapter 14, The Unforgivable Curses, is coming up later this week, and I will schedule it soon. Have a great day, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.